some about raising city chickens. I guess I should tell you a little bit maybe where I come from. I grew up on a small farm in Nebraska, and so we had backyard chickens. Not limited to 4, I was in the country, but it was a small flock. So I've had experience there. I've also had some experience with some large commercial companies, so quite a gamut of things. She asked if I had chickens now, and I don't, but we have a bunch there at the university, so I get pretty good chicken access anyways. But I'll talk a little bit, very quickly, why you might want chickens, and I think if you're here, you've probably already come to that conclusion, so, or at least thinking about it, so I won't spend a lot of time there. Talk a little bit about housing and some things to think about, some sort of husbandry things, and then I have some stuff on food safety, health, our own health, and the birds' health. So I'll try to get that in a half hour, we'll see. But, so, whoops, why would you want to raise chickens? Well, probably eggs is the #1 reason I think many people get into this, at least to start. And, you know, the whole grow your own food thing, it's very fresh. You can go out and gather your eggs and cook with them right away. Lots of different colored eggs, as you can see, and it's quite in there. Now, I would caution you, a lot of people think they're going to save money, and I would say if that's what you're looking at, you probably should nix that right away. You know, by the time you get a coop and the chickens and the feed, you're probably never going to break even on eggs, okay? But that's not the main incentive for many people, so there's that. Another reason you might is sort of a garbage disposal. You can get rid of a lot of table scraps. Pest control at the bottom, that's a little limited because you have to keep the birds in, but they will help keep bugs down. The table scraps, and I'll tell you, I think there's not many concerns with table scraps for chickens. You can go on the internet and you can read lists of all these things that are horrible for chickens. My experience, the few things that are, most chickens won't eat anyway. So I'm pretty laissez-faire about it. You see the onions, I think there's some onion skins in there. There's some evidence that onion may transfer into the eggs, so you might get a little onion flavor in the eggs. It takes a fair amount, but again, you might run into that. A few things might flavor the eggs, but generally, if it's clean, vegetable scraps, I wouldn't feed moldy things, stuff like that. But if it's clean, they'll probably pick at it and be just fine. Again, don't count on savings, really. Most of those are pretty high fiber, high water. They're not going to be high in energy or protein, so you're probably not going to be able to cut back a lot on the regular chicken feed. But that said, it really shouldn't be a problem. And I would also suggest getting grit for them if you're going to feed them plant material, vegetable scraps, things like that. And grit is just little rocks, okay? You can give pea gravel or whatever and give them that. And the grit works as the chicken's teeth, right? So they don't have teeth, they swallow the rocks are in the gizzard and it grinds up the food. If you're feeding all commercial feed, it's already been ground, you don't really need to worry about grit. Why else might you want to? Fertilizer. This company I don't think is currently in business. They were from just up the road here and they were selling chicken manure, dried and pelleted. But it is a very good fertilizer source, and I've got some stuff on that I think later on I took out, but I think there's some, I took it out here, I think it's in later. We'll talk about some safety issues there, but chicken manure is a very good fertilizer source. And again, I said kind of not your ordinary cat or dog. Most of the people that I've talked to with city flocks, either they got into it as having a pet, or after the fact, they really became pets. People find out that, yeah, the eggs are neat, but differently, the different colors of chickens, the different behaviors, and when you have a very small flock, you know, they'll be very tame usually, and so I think you'll find that that's a reason most people have them. And they're fairly inexpensive. All right, so again, I think most of you didn't need to be sold on that too much. So getting started, first thing, is it legal? And that's apparently been a big question here, and there's still some questions there. So you know, you want to check that, make sure that you cover all the legal issues, and go from there. Some things about getting started. This is a huge table, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but I'll mention, really, you can either buy fertile eggs, chicks, or adult chickens, okay? And I'm going to tell you right up front, I would suggest chicks for most people, okay? They're available. I think you mentioned they're selling them at the farm stores here. There's people out in the country that will have them. The reason don't push fertile eggs a lot is you also have to buy an incubator. You have to learn about incubation skills. It makes it a little more risky.
Or have a broody hen.
Or have a broody hen, yeah. Which, once you have them, you can go that route, yeah. But getting started, but you're right, you can go with the broody hen. And if you have that, then that's not so far off. But otherwise, I think it makes them a little more challenging. The chicks, the big reason I like them is the disease risk is much lower. If you get adult chickens, there's more of a chance that you're going to buy a disease along with it. You know, they've been exposed to things, and so that's where I look at that. Now, it does require a little bit more brooding equipment, things like that, as we'll talk about. Or the broody hen, if you have her. The one other thing, and I hear this a lot from people with, again, really small flocks, is getting chicks. You can tame them. They will be much tamer and used to being handled and things like that. Whereas if you get adult chickens, they're probably less likely to that. They'll still tame down, but they may not be quite as much pets. All right. So again, that's what I worry about when getting adult chickens. I'll tell you, I get a lot of calls from people that I have chickens, all of a sudden they're sick. And one of the first questions I ask is, well, did you add some other chickens in recently? And there's a pretty good percentage chance that they'll say, yeah, I bought one somewhere, or somebody else had one they were getting rid of, and I brought it, you know, things like that. And all of a sudden you start mixing chickens and you start seeing diseases. So I think it's safer that way. Sources of chickens then, the mail order hatcheries, and this has traditionally been where a lot of people would get chicks. For a long time, the big issue there was you had to buy 25 because they would ship them in a box like that, and they needed 25 to stay warm. That's pretty tough if you're only allowed 4, right? So I'll tell you, the people in Madison have sort of set up a news group online where they get together and mix their orders. And it works pretty well so that they can have, you know, half a dozen people go together. Several of the hatcheries now have started where they will sell 3 or 4 or 5 chicks. It's expensive because they have to add heat packs in with them, but they will do that, so that's an option. Again, the farm stores, typically they buy theirs from a mail order hatchery, but they do the bulk so that you don't have to. Again, there are breeders out around, depending on what kind of chickens you want and access, but there are a lot of people that raise these, so that would be another option. And again, I would be a little cautious of the rescues and swap meets and things, at least until you get started, because there is added risk there. Once you get on your feet and you're used to things, then maybe you can look at some of those. A couple more things, more sort of legal issues. State of Wisconsin requires that if you have a chicken, whether it's one chicken or a million chickens, you are to register your premise, okay? And it's this website that you see there. You put down your name and contact information, the physical location of the chickens, so the address where they are kept, and that's really it. The idea of this is if there's a disease outbreak, as we saw last year with influenza, they will put a spot on the map where that outbreak is, and they'll draw a circle about 6 miles around it typically, and they will contact everybody that has chickens in that 6-mile radius. What they did last year, and this is typically what would go on, is that they will come and they'll test your birds, okay? In the case of influenza, they take a swab down the throat, so they stick like a Q-tip in there and rub it around and they test it. So it's not that they're going to come and kill your chickens or anything, they test it. Now, if you tested positive, that would be a different story, but they didn't last year. Nobody did, so that was good. So that one is required. This one, if you're here in Janesville, is not required because you're not allowed roosters, and that's only if you have breeding stock. Okay, so if you don't have any roosters, you're not going to be having much breeding stock. All right. So those are some things before you really get started. I want to talk a little bit about housing, which maybe I should have had before the sources of chicks, but it works both ways. And I think most of us, when we think of housing, we think, oh, we need to keep the chickens in. And that's true, but that's maybe a minor part of it, really. Really, we're probably more intent on keeping other things out, okay? And especially predators. And I'll talk just briefly about that, if I think I'll have time. Keeping diseases out, so we'll have a little bit on some biosecurity. And then protection from the elements. And this is one that always comes up, and it's a difficult one to answer very adequately, but you do need to protect your chickens from the elements. This rooster, I don't know how well this shows up back there, but he has frostbite. All this part here that's discolored, that's all dead tissue, and that's going to fall off. So that part froze. You can also maybe see the wattles, about 1/3 of them here. So you want to avoid that, okay? And so that's really where I mean protection from the elements. So we'll talk a little more about some things there, but those are some things I think to think about when you're designing your house.
Was he taken away from where we're having them letting you get frostbite?
No, I don't think so. There was probably I'm trying to think where I got that picture, but I think it was a rural situation, and it happens occasionally. You know, I don't think there was any issue necessarily. And he'll come out of it. That tissue will slough off. In the future, he'll have just kind of a flat comb and about half the wattles. But they will survive it and be okay. It's just not good in the short term. Yeah.
I know we used to have chickens, we've had that, because we let them out every day in their coop, and the chickens didn't want to come in. When it was cold, they wanted the exercise.
Yeah.
So it was nothing we could do, it just
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. It's almost, I shouldn't tell this story, but I get razz about it a bit. It's almost always the roosters, and people point that out to me a lot because they say the women or the females are smart enough to put their head under their wing and they don't have frostbite. But it is typically the roosters, for some reason, have a bigger comb and they will hold their head up and freeze. So maybe you guys don't have to worry about that either if you just have hens. All right, so some considerations with housing. And first thing I would suggest is insulating the coop. Some people don't, but I think it's best, both for summer and winter. But the thing, and I love this picture, if you're going to use styrofoam like that, you have to cover it, okay? Chickens love styrofoam. I don't know why, but they will eat it until it's gone. I've heard from people that they'll go around their house and peck the styrofoam that's, you know, if it's sticking out at the bottom. So you have to cover it, but I would suggest insulating. I think it's worthwhile to do. Solid floor, you know, concrete is great, but it's expensive, but at least a wood floor would be good. It'll be easier to clean, keeps rodents out, at least more so. Ventilation is a big one, and I'll mention this again later, but ventilation is very important. Chickens produce a lot of moisture, okay? And their droppings are wet, they breathe out moisture, and if you don't have ventilation, that's where you really get into the frostbite issues. If it's moist, you will see wet litter, and that causes problems, so it's not good. And I would say I'd rather see it cold and ventilated than warm and damp. You're going to have a lot more problems. Operator ease, you know, try to make it easy to clean or you won't clean. And then really in town, aesthetics play some. You want to look. Here's some examples. These are a couple from Madison. You know, you don't have to have a fantastic coop, but something nice. That's a fairly nice one that's, you know, something you can have in your backyard. There are a lot of plans for chicken coops. And really, there's probably as many styles of chicken coops as there are people keeping chickens almost. They're just, you can have a lot of variation in what you have. Yeah.
Did you mention that we have to submit this to the city plan?
I did not, and that's, but yeah. So you have to have it planned ahead of time. Okay. Yeah, I'm not real familiar with your rules specifically, so that's good. Yeah.
We didn't need a photo or anything when I took mine down.
Okay.
I mean, I had one, but they took the photo.
Okay. They did? Okay. Okay. There's some fancy ones. This one, the Neiman Marcus catalog, I think it lists at $100,000, but they do send chickens with it. What really got me was the picture, it's all roosters and baby chicks. Anyway. Yes, there you go. You can have indoor chickens with diapers, but I wouldn't suggest it. All right, so a little bit on some husbandry. I'll try to get you along here. When I get calls about something wrong with the chickens, I try to think of this word flaws, and I don't mean that I'm picking at flaws. What I'm looking at is feed, light, air, water, and space. And really, most of your husbandry issues are going to deal with one of those things. And so I'll kind of go quickly through some things about each of these. So this is starting chicks, and again, you've got sort of all those things. I wouldn't suggest something this elaborate for any of you for 4 or 5 chickens, but those are some options if you had a couple hundred chickens. This is something that's not a bad setup for a few chickens, okay? It's easy to clean. You know, it's got feed, light, air, the air temperature, we'll talk about that a bit, water, good space, okay? I wouldn't probably suggest that unless you really have an open, you know, an extra bathroom. Chickens tend to, they're very dirty as far as dusty, okay? The feather dander, as they're growing new feathers, the dust from the litter, from the feed. If you try to raise them in the house, you're going to get sick of it in about a week, okay? But a lot of people do for a short time with chicks. But they will cause a lot of dust. I wouldn't suggest that. So, but a little plastic tub like that works well for at least the first year or so to get started. As far as feed for chicks, I would say commercial feed is best, and usually 18% is what you'll start with for chicks. We probably don't need to talk about meat-type chickens. The medicated question comes up a lot, and I'm really very ambivalent about that. I think if you want to use medicated feed, it works. If you don't want to use medicated feed, probably will be okay without it. The medication really is for one disease, and that's coccidiosis. Coccidiosis hits in the intestine and it causes diarrhea, sometimes bloody diarrhea if it's bad enough, and it can kill the chickens. If you keep everything nice and dry, you're usually okay and you won't have a problem. The other thing is, if you do get a problem and they get sick, you can treat them afterwards. So you get the same medication really and put it in the water, but at a higher dose. So to me, the medicated feed, yeah, it adds a little extra buffer, but if you don't want to use it, it's not really.
Do you still use terramycin for that?
No. And Proleum is usually what I would suggest, yeah. And terramycin is probably going to go away as far as a chicken drug. I would guess most of the antibiotics are as of next year. So it's going to be harder to do that. Yeah, so Amprolium typically is what I would suggest. Let's see. Again, we talked about grid. All right, lights. I really, natural light is okay. You're probably going to use a heat lamp at first. It really is not terribly important for the baby chicks. Most people want to give them some dark time, but if your heat lamp is on, they'll be fine with that. When you get to, 4 or 5 months old, then lights will be a bigger issue. Temperature for air. This is probably older than any of us in the room, and it hasn't changed. You start at 95 degrees, and you lower it 5 degrees per week, okay? And it works well. And by the time then they're 5 or 6 weeks old, they're down to, 65, 70, and things are good, and they're feathered, and usually you can get them out, yeah. Yeah.
Are your slides on your website or something, or should I be taking?
They aren't
Alright.
necessarily,
Is there
I don't think,
information
but I
on
can
there?
get them to you. I might have them on there, I can't remember, but I can certainly get them to you. Leave them with you.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And this temperature gradient, the idea of that is you put the light or the heat at one side and then let the chick decide where they want to go. It's nothing real or shattering, but they will. They'll move closer if they're cold, and they'll move farther away. And I always tell people, they'll tell you if they're uncomfortable, okay? If they're cold, they'll be cheap and loud, and you'll know it just sounds stressed. If they're too hot, they'll probably cheep, or they'll just be laying there looking very uncomfortable. But you'll know. You'll know. All right. Ventilation again, and I just want to stress again, you need to provide fresh air and you need to get rid of that water vapor. And I think I'll skip some of that. Yeah. Water, get water, okay? There's not a lot to say about that. Clean water. Space. I would say typically 4 to 6 square feet for most breeds of chickens would be a minimum. And if you can give them more, great. With 4 chickens, you probably, yeah.
Is that inside space or outside space?
So that is typically inside space. You might be able to push that a little bit. The problem is with our winters, it gets to be pretty long if you've got them crowded much more than that. So, I wouldn't go less than 3 to 4 inside, because they're probably going to have to spend a fair amount of time in the winter, at least nasty days. Yeah. If you notice, a lot of the coops in the city situation, if you look, are raised, and that way you've got extra space underneath, so it saves it's probably a little colder in the winter, but it gives you more space than before. All right, quickly to maturity. again, about 4 to 6 months of age, and this is when they're going to reach maturity, and you start seeing new things. Hopefully you don't see crowing, but it happens. I'll tell you, the sexers, when you buy chicks, will tell you they're about 95% accurate. Well, that means 1 in 20 is wrong, right? So if you got that 1 in 20, you're kind of stuck. And so you can probably get an idea before that. You can look at feathers, but certainly if they start crowing, you're not going to be able to keep them. And we can talk about what to do with that at some point. Pecking orders may become more of an issue. They start wanting to be the dominant